Welcome everyone. Simon Jacobson here. Happy Yud Aleph Shvat. This is the pilot launch of a new series of live webcasts called MyLife, Chassidus Applied, which is focused and its objective is to answer the most pressing questions that we all are challenged with, using the directives and the blueprint of Torah and Chassidic thought to address and speak to our personal, emotional, psychological, all the issues that we deal with on a daily basis during times of crisis, in good times, and in not such great times. So before we get into the meat of the actual questions and answers, which I must say, been overwhelmed with hundreds of literal emails that have come in anonymously, some not anonymously, about all the matters that concern us. Let me give some background of why we launched this series. And I speak particularly for those that are familiar with the history of Chabad Chassidic thought. Those of us that are not, hopefully some of the background will help. As I mentioned, today is the 11th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat. So it's an appropriate time to launch this. This is the day, the full day, the first day that our Rebbe, the 7th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, assumed the leadership of Chabad in the year 1951, formally assumed it, a year after the passing of his father-in-law. One of the themes in the discourse that he delivered at the outset of that year, 1951, on Yud Shvat, is a theme of when you go to battle, when there's a crisis and you go to battle, that's when the expression mevaz b'za eitzrus, you squander and you expose and you splurge all the great treasures, as an analogy of a king who's going to war. When he feels challenged, that's when he opens up the coffers. The same is psychologically true and emotionally and personally true. In a time of crisis, unfortunately, it challenges us and provokes us to elicit deeper strengths, which is really the essence of what Chassidic thought was in the first place. We as a Jewish people have been here for many years, and we faced many challenges. But especially in the modern age, a new challenge settled in. How do we reconcile our Judaism in a modern world with all the things that were going to come in the last few centuries? The Enlightenment, the emancipation of the Jews, assimilation, and today what we call is psychological dysfunctionality. So over 200 years ago, 250, 300 years ago, the Baal Shem Tov and then Rabbi Shneer Zalman of the Adi founded what is called Chabad Chassidus. And in doing so, he gave us a blueprint how to deal with our personal, emotional lives and relating to God. And today, for whatever reason, this has come up again, even though it's over 2 centuries ago. What is its relevance to our lives? Just the other day, a fellow tells me, I don't know if Chassidic thought is relevant to our life today. He wrote it for souls that are of a higher level. Yes, they struggle, they have their challenges, but it's not people like us. We live in a dysfunctional age. We're dealing with addictions, we're dealing with depression, we're dealing with dysfunctionality, abuse. Alter Rebbe was dealing with souls that were struggling, but were struggling with whether they can focus on prayer or not. And when I shared with him the famous analogy everyone knows that the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneer Zalman of Liadi gave, and that was of a sick child who's in a comatose state. And doctors have given up. And one doctor says that if you take the most precious stone of the king's crown and you crush it and mix it with water, the powder, perhaps one drop will go into the clenched teeth of this comatose child and perhaps save him. Most of it will spill away, wasted. I said, what is that? That's a comatose state. He says, even that comatose state is healthier than we are. Well, I'm here to submit that that's simply unacceptable. It's unacceptable to say that the 7 Chabad Rebbes, including our Rebbe in our time, we're talking to people not like ourselves. We're talking to the select few of a certain elite. It's actually contrary to everything what the Rebbe said. So I said to him, and I say to myself, and I say to all of us, perhaps we may have a challenge of how we apply Chassidus to our lives. But as this expression goes, imreiku, if it's empty, maybe you're the one that's lacking. Maybe you don't know how to apply it. Instead of saying that the Rebbe, God forbid, were out of touch or something else, Maybe we simply don't appreciate and understand what they taught us. And that's why we're doing this. I felt I have to be as one person, and hopefully this will be a catalyst, and many others will participate in their own ways, of taking these Chassidic teachings, which yes, are esoteric and profound, and apply them to our lives in a specific, direct way. To take literally what the Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe, wrote, what the Alter Rebbe wrote in his introduction to Tanya. He wrote it's a book of eitzes, a book of advice. Not just a book of scholarship, a book of advice where he gathered together all the advice to answer all the problems that we deal with. And he says, and if you cannot find an answer, go to the Gedali, to the great people of the town, and try to find an answer. So I don't know how we define great, but we all have to do what we have to do, and try to do something to address this issue. And I believe this isn't just a historic moment, but it's also far deeper than that. The whole point of the teachings of Chassidus were to align a universe and prepare it for the coming of Mashiach. A healthy world. Because what is health if not the alignment between ourselves, what we do, with our soul's purpose, with how God planned and intended us to be in this world. So the teachings of Chassidus are meant to help us align that. Now Torah in general has that objective, but Chassidus in particular. So what we're going to do in this and in future sessions are going to take actual questions, real questions, which I shall read from people who've sent them in, obviously confidentially, anonymously, and address them question by question. Obviously, we will not be able to deal with all questions in 1 hour, and this will be a 1 hour session. So whatever is not covered will, please God, be covered next week, next Sunday, same time, same place. And I'm trying to cover the discussions today. Matters that are, I guess we'll go from, as they say, min haklal el haprat, more general questions that cover, I guess, a broader spectrum of people, and then go to things that are more specific and different challenges and issues that we all deal with. As I mentioned, the questions that came in are literally from one extreme to the next, dealing with severe addictions, severe depression, issues of infidelity, sexual issues with drugs and alcohol, dealing with bullying, dealing with, you name it, children, marriage, basically the entire spectrum of any imaginable issue. And I want to make a few key disclaimers before we proceed, and then go into some of the first questions and move forward. A few disclaimers. First of all, in a session like this online, and without sitting with an individual, it's very clear this is not meant to be a replacement of any type of therapy, any type of healing for that matter. This is meant to open a dialogue, and a dialogue that will directly and frankly and candidly address Chassidus and our issues. The objective that for me, the success would be that if people go away listening to this and saying, I think Chassidus has something for me, that's what we need here. But to qualify this, it's important to know that the bottom line is, any given challenge, it is necessary to deal with a professional, deal with a mashpia, and I'll discuss that in a moment a little more at length, and talk to someone one-on-one. First of all, there's no one-size-fits-all. Even though Torah and Chassidus give us principles, these are principles, they're guiding principles. Then there's case by case. Every individual case is different. Each of us have our own needs, we're at a different pace, and so on. So number one, there's the issue of each of us having our particular challenges. Number two, things have to be spoken privately. You can't really speak in generic terms to a whole group of people because it's some things that we share intimately. And number three, we need expertise. We need expertise. So I want to address this question, which was actually one or two questions that came in. What is the role of Torah and Chassidus vis-a-vis the role of therapy, psychology, psychotherapists, the world of mental health professionals? So let me briefly answer that question. It's a question that several people asked, and obviously it's a topic that must be addressed. So we know that the Torah says the following. V'rape yirape, in the chapter Mishpatim in Exodus, which we'll be reading actually next week, we say, V'rape yirape, the healer shall heal, and the Talmud says from this that the healer was given permission by God to heal. Some commentaries actually say permission means not just permission, but a license, but have an obligation. Because the way the world was created, God also implanted His wisdom of healing into the system of the world. And just like scientists and others can discover God's mind through studying the cosmos or studying human physiology, there's also the human psyche. So when it comes to any clinical issues, particularly, just like someone breaks, God forbid, a leg, or someone has an issue with their heart, or kidneys, or something like that, or eyesight, we also have an area of a field called emotional or mental health. And in those areas, these experts have given permission. Now, like in any field, not every expert is an expert. Some are better than others, and some are good for one person and not so good for another. When you're dealing with mental, emotional issues, it's far less tangible than, for instance, a purely physical type of ailment. Even though there's no such thing as purely physical or purely so-called spiritual or psychic, but clearly it's a little more subtle. However, and this is the big however, every doctor was given this power by God. And healing comes from God. And it's all implanted in the world that God created. So it's understandable that Torah and Chassidus have much to say about healing. This doesn't mean it replaces, it means it complements. Because the Torah speaks about the purpose of a human being's life. Someone can be physically healthy, but not necessarily spiritually healthy. They can be robust, fit, breathing well, their heart circulation is good, their nervous system is well, but they could be miserable. They could feel aimless, feel like a walking zombie. So the area where Torah Chassidus comes in is primarily in the mental emotional dimension of purpose, of who you are, and primarily in the area of preventive medicine. So the qualification I want to make is that it's important to know that when there's an issue a person has, the first place to go for a Jew is to follow a mashpia or a rav, who, if they are competent, will tell you, this is an area that you need also a professional if you have a doubt. If it's a headache or something, it's very clear that one needs a doctor, a medical doctor, or a psychiatrist, or anything of that field. It goes into the medical area. Where it's a far thinner line is when you're dealing with things that are less clinical, which we will be addressing, of course. Things that are not in the category of a mental illness, let's say schizophrenia, or bipolar, or borderline, and so on and so forth. Things that are perhaps man-made even. Addictions we fall into. Nothing clinical about it. Nothing genetic about it. The traps that we get into in this modern world. That is something that we have to address far more. And there too, in a healthy environment, you'd want to have an approach that Chassidus brings in, and perhaps complemented by some of the methods that have been studied and learned in the secular world. Now, frankly, I'm the first to say, and I'll say in a messianic world, where human beings will be healthy, Chassidus may be exactly the medicine we need. And it'll go hand in hand with how human beings interpret it and apply it. But it's clear that this is a partnership regardless, because even applying Chassidus requires people. Requires mashpiyim, requires teachers, requires mentors. So, the next question I was asked, and again I'm speaking general ideas, was the question of, a fellow writes, actually, I don't even know if it's a fellow, it could be a man or a woman, that has the question, how can we call Torah or Chassidus psychology? Which again is a general idea that needs to be addressed right at the outset. And the answer is, maybe you can't. But if you want to, you'll follow the sources. Kuntus and Yonah Shal Torah Chassidus is a discourse, a discussion that the Rabbi gave on Yutas Kislev the year 1965, Tavshin Chavav in the Hebrew date, Yutas Kislev, and he addresses this issue very directly. He cites there that the Talmud says that God created the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and He created Torah Tavlin as a spice to flavor and help transform this evil inclination. The obvious question is, what, Torah is a spice? Torah is a medicine? And yet we still call Torah, at times we call it medicine. It brings refuah, healing to the world. And the Rebbe's answer, which is a fundamental answer in Chassidus, is the following. Torah is God's gift. Shashoyim lefanov. It's God's delights. It's higher than anything in existence. So you cannot render it as a medicine, or as a preemptive medicine even. And that's why King David was punished when he called the Torah Zmiris, song. It was a consolation to him. That's not the Torah. Yet at the same time, the Torah has the power to heal. That doesn't define the Torah as medicine. It has the power to heal. And the Rebbe adds that in order to appreciate Torah, you know where you see its real power? When it does heal. When it comes into a situation that is not a healthy situation, and it helps a person become a healthier person, you see the power of Torah there. So the answer is Torah psychology? Torah is divine gift. It's divine energy. As he calls it there, Chassidus is a chodash, is a new energy, unprecedented, from the etzem itself, from the source itself. But where do you appreciate its power is when it comes into a dark world like ours. And it helps us transform our lives, refine our lives, and become healthier human beings. So clearly the answer would be therefore that Chassidus, it may be called divine psychology. Whereas human psychology would be with human beings, just like scientists and professionals, they study from the bottom up through experimentation and through analysis and observation. They come to understand certain psychological truths. Torah and Chassidus particularly maps out, like an X-ray, the soul. You open up a Tanya, and if you study the little Kabbalah, we know, Tanya says, every human being has 10 faculties. These 10 faculties, Nishtal Shalom Mehen, evolved from 10 divine emanations called the 10 spheres. So our faculties define us. Our conscious faculties, cognitive and emotional faculties, what makes us tick, are evolved from a more spiritual dimension. And then we have what's called in Kabbalistic and Chassidic terminology, moiches tima, chachmas tima. Some call it the unconscious, let's call it the superconscious. So you have an entire cosmic order that exists in the microcosm of each of us as human beings, that each of us reflects this whole picture, and you want to understand yourself, the first thing is you need an X-ray. What at the end of the day is a doctor? A doctor has the training and the ability to see beyond the symptoms. What it means beyond the symptoms, you and I have, let's say, a pain. You may just say, it's a pain in my finger, pain in my toe, pain in my chest, God forbid. You go to a doctor's trained, knows a pain in the chest, okay, what are the usual suspects? And eliminates all the possibilities, does some tests, X-rays, MRI, different type of scans, and comes back and says, I believe this is the cause. A real expert can find causes that others perhaps will not notice. What does Chassidus map out? What does it map out? It's a map. A map of what? A map of us. The human being was created in the microcosm of existence, the universe. The universe is created by God. The human being was created in the divine image. In the divine image of the divine. Chassidus analyzes what that divine image looks like. It's a structure of worlds, a structure of spheres. Being our discussion here is about applying it, not the philosophy of it. Suffice it to say, all this is an X-ray and a map of who we are. Now, like any X-ray and map, it can be complicated, it could be dense, but it's a map of you and I. Every word in Chassidus is a map of us. Every level, God didn't need it for God's edification. It is in order to give us tools to understand ourselves and to improve who we are. So what is an X-ray? You ever see a doctor take an X-ray of lungs? You take an X-ray of someone's lungs and you place it on a screen near an X-ray of healthy lungs. And by contrast, you can see, this is what healthy lungs look like. And here you see, here's a lung, there's a blockage, God forbid. Or some other, something else that is not normal. How do you know? You juxtapose. Same thing here. When you read about the spheres in Atzilus, you're getting a picture of what a healthy divine image looks like. What does a newborn child look like? What does a tzaddik look like? You look at a human being in their perfect form. Then you can juxtapose and say, that's that. Where am I now in contrast? If chesed is love, what does my love look like? So you have a backdrop, you have a context of which to compare your personality with the personality the way it was meant to be. And this can be done no different than a medical examination, an exam of your own so-called spiritual and emotional well-being. By analyzing, what does your chesed look like? What does your gvura look like? This is Chassidus. Now, is that the definition of Chassidus? The definition of Chassidus is Er Chodesh Shem Atzmus. That's what the Rebbe says in that kuntris in Yonesh Teach Chassidus. Chassidus is a revelation of divine revelation. But it's a divine revelation that came down to earth, speaks to us in our terms, talks about us and who we are and what makes us tick. In order for us to be able to improve, to be able to examine, to be able to preempt. Now, next question. Another question was asked, is Chassidic thought a behavioral type of approach, or is it a therapeutic approach? Let me explain what that means. And that is basically the question. Behavioral, in psychology of behavioral, is the idea, change your behavior and then other things, deeper things will change. For example, learn to say thank you. Learn to be gracious. Act act that way. Act that way and you become that way. Now we have clearly in Torah that concept that sometimes hergel nasatech, even if you're not in the mood, behave that way. That's behavioral. Therapeutic is far more digging deeper. Instead of just trying to control the symptoms of your anger or of your depression or other things, and forcing yourself, dig deeper and find out what's the cause. What's causing you to be that way? The answer, my friends, based on my understanding of Chassidus, it's both. The Torah speaks about both. We have the famous story of the Alter Rebbe when some non-Chassidim came and challenged him and said, look at your Chassidim, they behave in ways that are hypocritical. They're davening, they're long, and they're doing other things. They're not on that level. And the Alter Rebbe famously responded to them, Halavai, may it be that it should be fulfilled in these Chassidim, the Mishnah that says, and he didn't even say which Mishnah, the Mishnah, and Meruba Midah Teva, and even more so in good matters. What's the Mishnah? The Mishnah says that a wealthy person that masquerades and makes believe he's poor will end up becoming poor. The Alter Rebbe said, may this mission be fulfilled in them, that someone, in other words, who's, let's say, doesn't hold by a certain type of level, behaves that way, it will be fulfilled in them many times more that they should become that way. So even though by nature you may not be so gracious and kind, you act that way, you become that way. So you clearly have that element. And in the language of Tanya, which we will talk about in a moment, Mayach Shalat Love, the ability of self-control and acting accordingly, discovering what is good behavior, disciplining yourself, and yes, sometimes imposing upon yourself that type of behavior. Then you have, obviously, Chassidus also talks about the inner forces of the soul, as I mentioned. The 10 spheres, Chochmas Tima, the unconscious, the superconscious, the garments, Levushim. So it's not just about behavior. Behavior, all you got to do is follow the laws of Derech Eretz, of Menschlichkeit, in Pirkei Avos, in the ethics of the fathers, and other laws of ethics. Chassidus talks more than that. Talks about working on yourself, working on your soul, looking at something and transforming. We talk, the expression is refining your emotional well-being. Personality development, character refinement. That's far more than just action. So the answer is, like in many cases, it's both. If you want a little more Chassidic terminology, you could say Chassidus, as it manifests in Mamala Kalalman of the human being, deals with the behavioral, imminent level of how one should align themselves to what God wants of us. You talk about the Chassidus of Sevav Kalalman, you'd say it's probably higher than psychology, it's more divine in nature. It's more getting beyond yourself and reaching into a divine level, which we shall soon talk about. Okay. Now, to sum up this first opening section, let me say the following. It's clear that Chassidus comes to address the matters of the soul. The matters of the soul include the human faculty, the human psyche. If the word psychology is a turn-off, don't use the word psychology. Use soul, use emotions, use mind, moichin, midas, whatever. I feel sometimes those of us that study these words, often these words become traps because you just repeat them by rote and you forget what they mean. The mind is a force inside of us that we have power over. What to think about, what not to think about, how to use your mind. The mind is used in all areas of life. People train how to use that mind. Chassidus talks about training your mind. And then there's, of course, dealing with the emotions. And then when you look, even in the basic book of Chassidus, Tanya, open up a Tanya, chapters 26, 27, 28 deal with depression. Ageres HaKedesh 21 deals with anger. The beginning of Tanya, and much of it deals with taivas, which are desires, lust, seduction, and all the different four midas, Yeseidas Harayim, which includes arrogance, includes indulgence, and so on. So Chassidus is full of dealing with the human condition. Now, obviously, writing a book for all types of people, you'll have people who their issues are far more subtle, and other people's issues are very more overt. But everything goes into the category of the battle, as he puts it in Tanya, of the two voices. And I'm intentionally not using the word Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh Abamis, because everybody knows those words who studied them. And they can become mechanical when you say them. What does it come down to? Two voices. A voice of the reflective mind, and a voice of your impulsive heart. This is a translation of chapter 9 in Tanya, in case you want to look it up. You go to chapter 12 in Tanya, it talks about the concept of self-control. You go to chapter 17, 18, and 19, and further on, he starts talking about the difficulty is you're not creating a deeper connection to God. You have it inherent, innate, and within you, and you need to discover it. So you have right here a whole system that is both behavioral and both internal, and they all work side by side. So that covers, I believe, to some extent, the overall picture of Chassidic thought. Now, obviously, like in all healing, preventive medicine and preemptive is the best. Like the famous line that says, it's far easier to bring up a healthy child than to fix a broken adult. But reality is reality, and we have to deal with both. But we need to distinguish the two, because I believe a lot of the confusion comes when we try to mix these two together. Chassidus and Torah want us to be healthy initially, to bring up our children from the youngest of age in the healthiest possible way, which will preempt so many of the diseases of our time. So obviously Chassidus talks a lot about that. But then there's another side. What happens if someone's already been broken? They've lost their innocence. They didn't have that type of purity. So you have Chassidus She'idin, for example. They grew up in an environment, Chassidus She'idin. I don't even know if it's through work. It's through osmosis, through their homes, their families, their education. And they're not capable of leaving that circle. The question is, that replicatable to someone that doesn't have that within their hearts and souls, or at least not active? Someone who has fallen, someone who has experienced things that have wandered away from that so-called naive purity. This is exactly where Chassidus comes into play. Why? Because you turn the clock back 500 years ago. 500 years ago, every child grew up in an environment which was completely pure and insulated, which was the best immunity. You picked up faith from the smell of the chicken soup in your mother's kitchen or grandmother's kitchen. Today is a different world. So we have to distinguish between preventive, and we have to deal with and what we call symptomatic or remedial approaches. And it's a very important distinction. But remember, all of us in our lives are not, thank God, we're not at the end of our lives. So there are many things we can begin doing today that's preventive for tomorrow. So we're going to now be addressing a few of these items in specific areas, but I wanted to give these few introductions, especially this last one, before we move into the next level. We know, for example, the Alter Rebbe in the beginning of Tanya's introduction to Tanya says, Derech harucha k'tzara, the long and short road. That clearly is obviously above all preventive. If you follow this approach, you'll prevent a lot of problems. The short, long approach is quick and fix, and it may solve something right now, a band-aid. But it won't last, it won't be sustainable, you won't own it. Arucha k'tzara, you do it this way, it may take longer, but when you finish, or not finish, when you master it to some extent, it becomes yours. You are able to now integrate it into your life. So you see right there several approaches. Example, God forbid someone's in an accident. No one should know of this. They rush to the hospital. They're bleeding. The first thing you have to do is stop the bleeding. You can't say, you know what, let's analyze what is the cause for all these problems. The first thing you have to do is stop the bleeding. And then isolate and define where is the problem, and then begin to remedy it. So this is also vital, because a lot of the questions that have come in, and I'm sure that, and even more that have not come in, come down to, are we dealing with an immediate emergency, so to speak? An emergency, obviously, if it's life or death or emergency of that level, clearly you should be approaching a professional as soon as possible. But we're talking about emergency, meaning I have an issue right now, at home, in my personal life, that I must deal with. And I'm pushed it off for too long. There's one approach to that. That's a short term, to get something going. And then there's a longer term plan. A good mashpia, a good, we'll call it a Chassidic, I don't know, people like the word therapist, but a Chassidic mentor, safer word, will tell you, here's some things I think you should do immediately, here's some things you should do longer term. And when you follow the Rebbe's letters and his advice, and you follow Chassidic approach, you'll find both. As I mentioned, there's some things you do that you have to deal with on a behavioral level right now. And there are things that you work on to repair and build and fix for a longer period of time. Now, with that said, I would like to go into some specific questions that came in. I've already addressed some general questions, but I want to talk now specific. So, I tried to take the questions that came in. There were many in many different categories. Try to bunch them together as much as possible. Unfortunately, every person writes their person. I wouldn't say unfortunately, fortunately, but also as far as organization goes, everybody can mix different things. But I found a certain pattern, a certain commonality of a number of questions. At least, I would say 10, 15 direct questions to the issue of using Chassidic terminology of the role of Kabbalah at all in Chassidus versus the role, and when we know when something is healthy Kabbalah and unhealthy Kabbalah. Let me explain the question, obviously. I'll use the words that were written to us. So here's the question. The question was asked, I've been brought up believing, let me read the full thing. I'm a typical Lubavitcher girl. Grew up on shlichus, went through the system. Here goes question number 1. I'm told that I don't care for myself properly. Though I never felt this way, I only felt that way about being devoted to my job, the Rebbe's and Yonim. I always felt the type of person to put my needs last, so that no other yid should have it good. I guess it means so that every other yid should have it good. But I put myself aside. Though now I am suffering from a particular illness, I question if it's really my behavior, condoned by Torah and Chassidus, which needs to change, or is it one of the many things from Hashem which I just don't understand right now. I've taken myself to a therapist. She tells me to become more selfish. She tells me, Im ein anili mili. She says, Shmini shebe shminis. I'm literally reading the letter. Though I feel that it's not in line with Chassidus, she tells me to become more in tune with what my body asks of me, and give in to my desires once in a while. It's okay. All I know is that now, when I allow myself to have one cookie, I want the whole bag. I'd rather not take in one to begin with. The more I think about myself, the less time I have to help others. I feel that I'm becoming too self-absorbed and losing my self-control by giving into myself too much. My mashpia says some people's avodah is doing more and others is doing less. Mine is apparently doing less. I have a very hard time swallowing all of this in light of which the Rebbe has taught. Trying to make sense of this all. She continues on with some more details which are not so directly connected to this question. This is a question that I could say at least 10-15 people in different words expressed. So this idea is, we're brought up in an education, they have to be ibrig, devoted to the cause. And that will be the best preemptive medicine. You're dedicated to the cause, it'll avoid getting into trouble in other areas. But now the question has arisen, and I'm sure people have heard about it, especially in the last few months. What happens if that was used as a weapon? It annihilated who you are as an individual. As just quoted here, correct, Hillel said, Imeina nili mili. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Only afterwards does he say, Imanila atzmi, if I am for myself, what will I be? Very legitimate question. So what happens if you've been annihilated? You don't have the anili mili. I'm not for myself, and I've completely dedicated myself to others, and now I come to discover, who am I? So what's the approach to this? Now here this thing gets even more complicated. It's not just whether Chassidus has an answer. Here Chassidus was used as a weapon. Now I should qualify, not Chassidus, the way people use Chassidus. This is a critical component. Because this goes back to what I said earlier about what is the role of Chassidus. I have no doubt that the thousands of pages written by the Rebbes was written with deep love. So I want to read another question which follows this question, and then I'll address both of them together. I recently experienced a workshop that taught me that I'm valuable. And that the idea of me being bottled, of me being subjugated to a cause and so on, has destroyed my identity. So I'm wondering whether this, what was taught to me, was true. I believe in the system, but it was taught in this way. So I'm not sure if it's a system, and so on. Because when I go back and look in the Likutei Torah, the Likutei Torah is one of the classics of the Alter Rebbe's discourses, I don't find anywhere it says that the Alter Rebbe or the other Rebbeim telling me that I'm valuable. I don't find such words. And here I heard it, and I hear it from others, and it makes me feel alive again. It makes me feel that I deserve to have a voice. Where I was brought up, that your voice doesn't matter, you just have to be dedicated to the cause. Very similar question, perhaps phrased a bit differently. So let me address this question. There are what we call axioms. Where in the Torah does it say, let alone, before we get to Chassidus, does it say anywhere in Chumash that you're valuable? That you're important? When Hillel said, Imein anili mili, where did he get that from? Where does it say that? Which pasuk does that say? So there's certain axioms that are without question the basis of all Judaism and all Torah. And let's start. What's the first description of the human being in the Torah? Not that we're an intelligent creature, not that we're an emotional creature. The first description is that we're created in the image of God. Now you tell me what that means. What's the implication of that? That we are godly. We're a piece of God. However you explain it philosophically. And God is nothing more important than God. So the 6 days of creation created all kinds of creatures, animals, fish, the cosmic, the celestial bodies, plants, vegetation, heaven and earth, light and so on. They're not created in the divine image. These are divine creations. They're divine creatures, they're divine art, but not a piece of the divine. So the first statement in the Torah is, you are a piece of God. This makes you indispensable. There's no philosophy or psychology in the world that can make you more indispensable than saying that you're a piece of God. Because that makes you divine. It makes you eternal in a certain way. It makes your actions and everything you do absolutely necessary. So does the Torah have to then go say in every line, you matter, you're valuable? The rest of the Torah follows. All the obligations, all the accountability, all our expectations of us are based on because you're extremely valuable. Let's go to the Torah now. Without even having deep faith, the Rebbes were shepherds. They cared about their people. Why did they sit and spend hours and hours writing these thousands of pages of Chassidus? Why didn't they just simply say, you know what, come see me, I'll soothe you, I'll calm you, I'll give you advice, I'll show you I love you, and repeat that again and again. Instead, they decided to sit in their rooms and write, and write, and write, and write. Tanya, how many years did it take? 20 years. The discourse is delivered. The time writing, there's no question this is what they did with most of their time. So you don't have to be a person of great faith to ask the question and assume. That means that they felt that this, what they wrote, is the best way they can express their love to us. By giving us a document. Every line is saturated with love. Now you'll say, how do I know that? Well, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. You're talking about people who dedicated their lives to helping us. Why would they write these books? To just express esoteric ideas, abstract concepts. And to take it a step further, you read it. You may not understand it all, but you see, what are they talking about? They're talking about us. So it doesn't have to be repeated every second that, you matter, you matter. And the question whether that would even help is another story. But when it's saturated with it, when you know it's coming from love, then it's a given. What I'm saddened by these questions is that people don't feel that. They don't feel Chassidus was written with love. And I'm not judging anyone. And God forbid, all that's gone on, as I've said a number of times, and I say it now for the record as well, this is not about critique of any individual. If someone has not seen a Chassidus or finds elsewhere a solution, I see that as a hungry soul. Listen, I've met many, many people who found God through completely unorthodox methods. Far Eastern disciplines, even foreign substances, which I won't mention in detail here. So, they were lost souls. This is where they found their God. Hopefully now they're on a path where they can experience it in a healthy way. Like I once told somebody who said, I found God through certain substance. So I said, listen, someone's not well, and the doctors revive him with a particular drug. Now that he's healthy, he doesn't have to necessarily continue taking it. Now do things in a healthy way. So this is not a matter of judgment. This is why we're doing this. It's a matter of looking deep and understanding every word is dripping with love. Just think that these words, forget about that the Torah, the Chassidus or Torah is written for a million people, millions of people. Imagine the Rebbe calls you in and says, you say to him, I have problems with shalom bayis. I have issues at home, I have issues with my children, I have issues in my own psyche. I'm struggling with an addiction, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with just being happy. Constantly anxious. And just for argument's sake, and the Rebbe says, I understand, and I care for you. Here, take a Maimer Chassidus, learn this Maimer. So you'll say, come back and say, listen, I don't challenge and question the Rebbe, but I learned the Maimer, I don't see how it speaks to me. But the Rebbe did that, which means he felt that is the best thing for you. So maybe you have to struggle a little. Find somebody and say, he gave me a document, the Rebbe, and I can't for the life of me understand how it speaks to me. I have no doubt, Shailas Chacham Chetzi Tshuva, you take any Maimer Chassidus and you do that, you'll start finding answers. Because let me give an example. If you came to the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, my parnosa, my livelihood is not doing well. And the Rebbe said to you, here, read this booklet, You go back, and this will help you in your parnasa. And you read the booklet, and it's very complex economic theory. And you don't understand it. But you know the Rebbe said that. He's a smart man. You give him the benefit of the doubt. What do? You hire or you go to someone who knows how to read economic theory and say, he told me, give me this book. The economist starts reading it and says, you know something? Your Rebbe gave you a formula to make $1 billion. What will you do? You'll do anything. You'll turn over the world. You won't leave a stone unturned to figure out what is the formula. So here we go. Chassidus was given to us as a formula to deal with our spiritual matters. Spiritual, I mean the whole spectrum of anything you have to do with psyche, with soul, with emotions, with mind, the whole spectrum. And with all the qualifications I made earlier. Here's the book. You don't read the formula, find someone that can. Put two heads together. If you know the answer is there, guaranteed you'll find it. The doubt that we have that the answer is there, that alone is a problem. So you have to, number one, believe that it's there, and then dig, like it's yours. It's your gift. Someone said to me, yeah, prove to me Chassidus is relevant. I told him, I have to prove to you? It was given to you as a gift like given to me. Why do you think I have to prove it to you? I see it as a gift to all of us. Let's put our heads together and do this. That's a proactive attitude. And by the way, that's a healthy attitude, which we shall surely address of how we tackle a problem. You have a problem today? How are we tackling this problem? There's a void. Our children don't relate to Chassidus. Some of us don't. So you can say, okay, you know what? I give up. Or I'll go elsewhere, find it elsewhere. Or I become hysterical or a lynch mob attacking anyone that looks for elsewhere. These are solutions. These are solutions of people who are, I would say, victims or just responding. Oh, you want a proactive Chassidic approach? Here's a book. Open it up. Study your soul. It's hard. Yes, it's hard. That's what leaders do. They figure it out, and you put your heads together. We're not talking about doing it on our own. The Alter Rebbe said clearly, go to the Gedalim Shabir, go to people, speak about it. He doesn't say Gadol, he says Gedalim, which means more than one. The Rebbe told people, different mashpiyim, every person has their own mindset, and find the answers. If we put our heads together, guaranteed we'll find answers that that would shock us. So, my answer to the question is Chassidus. Where does it say in Chassidus that God that you're loved and that you matter? Your mere existence. Every word of Chassidus is that God put you here, created a whole Seder Shtalshlus. And Tanya, he says, imagine, even at Tzimtzum, he says, that God went and all for us. God was mitzamtzim, concealed His light for what purpose? What purpose? In order for you and I to be able to exist. What's deeper love? And kamayim upon Him, what shouldn't we do? Now I understand when you talk about it esoterically and philosophically, it can become what we call in psychology cognitive dissonance or emotional dissonance. What's cognitive dissonance? Where you feel disconnected from the idea that you're addressing. Okay, let's now go to the Kabbolos question. Very good question. You brought up in school, and everything that you did, you were knocked in your head. Don't think about yourself. Think about God. Think about the Rebbe. Think about the Kavona. Okay. Why should you learn? Because if you don't, you'll be punished. Let's talk a completely negative, fear-based education, which itself is the opposite of a Chassidic approach. Teaching Chassidus in a non-Chassidic approach, we'll say. Saying the right thing the wrong way. I'm sure all of us have had a taste of this. Now, obviously, children need discipline, but let's say it completely demoralized and annihilated someone. And I'm assuming that's taka what happened. Because let's be honest, some of us are far more intact than we think we are. When someone tells you you're not intact, you get yourself a good excuse, and you suddenly decide that you've been annihilated. But let's assume for a moment that's not the case. You actually were beat up. God forbid abuse. So I have to qualify and say the following answer. This is case by case. I definitely have met people who the Kabbalah soil was completely contaminated for them. It was never used in a healthy way. They were forced to do things and forced to behave in a way that was opposite of Torah, all using that the authority has told you to do so. In a case like that, you clearly need to have very specific help. And Chassidus has much to say about that. Because a person like that needs to rebuild their identity. That is true. But here's a critical point. I know people who, for example, have been hurt deeply in their lives. They go into therapy. I know a particular woman who grew up in a very dysfunctional home. She went into therapy, and now she says, now is my time. 15 years of my life I was silenced. Today, it's my time. I live a narcissistic, selfish life because for 15 years I was deprived. Now I want to eat. I want to indulge for 15 years. She more or less says it in those words. And her therapists and professionals feed that. They say, listen, you've been deprived, now you have to fight for yourself. Is this healthy or not healthy from a Chassidic point of view? It's one evil fighting another evil. So I understand a person who's been thirsty and has never allowed their voice to speak, now they're speaking. But is this really a solution? The Chassidic approach would be, we absolutely understand how you've been annihilated. That's not a question. But the answer to this is not you're going to reject any type of dedication to others and become completely self-absorbed. The answer is identify yourself and use that self in a strong way. Chassidus talks about a concept called anov and shuffle. Very applicable right here to this discussion. What's the difference between an anov and a shuffle? An anov is a humble person. A shuffle is a person of low self-esteem. An anov, well, let's start with a shuffle. A shuffle, a person of low self-esteem. A person of low self-esteem is someone who thinks he's nobody, thinks he's a shmat, a scoop on the dresses, a doormat. That's unhealthy. That's demoralizing. It doesn't motivate you anywhere. That is klippah. That must be fought. If someone says, I'm worthless, an anov is someone who feels very strong about themselves. They know their strengths. They know God gave me these strengths, and say to themselves that if God had given someone else the strength, they would have done better than I. So when you identify a person who's been beat up in the first place as a shuffle, of course, the first thing is to build up. You are God's gift to this world. That's the key, God's gift. Not that you just now have to compensate for years of deprivation of self. Now self-indulge. You're God's gift and you deserve everything in this world. You deserve every gift. But that's a big difference in feeding arrogance than feeding anova. Bittul is not a negative force. To say I'm going to fight a negative bittul with another negative called arrogance, or let's call it identity, is not the answer. The answer is discover that you are God's gift, because that's the long-term solution. So ultimately the answer is, my friends, Kabbolos and internalization. If a Kabbolos was damaged, meaning a damaged type of experience of it, then yes, you have to correct it. This woman writing, I have to say, I probably agree with the therapist that she went to. She needs to start focusing on herself. When I say self, not self because self-absorbed. She has to focus on herself because God wants an individual. She may have lost her individuality. She may not even be serving God properly because the Einanili Mili is not there. Now, of course, this needs to be discussed case by case. And again, I'm talking general principles, but just to qualify. Yes, Kabbolos can be fed in a toxic way, and then it's not true Kabbolos, because at the end of the day, as Chassidus explains, and there's a beautiful sikha talk from the Rebbe, you can all check it out, Sazriya Mitzera, Tafshim Memches, 1988, where the Rebbe speaks about the two prakim in Pirkei Avos, which speaks about chapter 1 is Moshe Kibbel Torah, Kabbolos, receiving the Torah, and chapter 2, it says what is the right way for a human being is the way that you should choose. That's Tiferes, that's a beautiful way. And the Rebbe asked this big question: is it beautiful or is it Kabbolos? And the answer is it goes hand in hand, because the same God that asked you to be dedicated to the Kavanah also said you're blessed with beautiful gifts of a mind, a heart, intuition, skills, talents. Are you using them? If you don't use them, you're defying the Kabbolos too. Because that same God that said, follow what I said, I also gave you skills, and you're not using your skills. You're not living up to your voice. Where's your voice? I gave you a voice. B'shvili nivra elam, you're different than someone else's opinion. What do you mean you don't have your own opinion? It says clearly every Jew should have their own opinion. Yes, halacha, you defer, but you don't have a position? So the point is to understand that Chassidus actually teaches the greatest ego is the one that says, I'm a divine ego. Which of course is a major theme in Ageres HaKodesh chapter 20, epistle 20 I should say, that talks about that. But we're being brief, so let's move on to the next series of questions. The next question, of course, is the issue of one of the biggest issues today, which is the issue of addiction. Addiction. Now, addiction takes on different shapes. There is, of course, the issue of drug addiction. There is alcohol addiction. There is there's a pornography addiction, sex addiction, sexual addictions, and other addictions. Addiction is defined as something that controls you instead of you controlling it. So force that controls you. Now, here's a Chassidic approach to addiction. As I said earlier, this should be worked together with people who are professionals. However, my belief is that if Chassidus finally rose to the occasion that we should all bring it to, it would become the defining standard of what psychology should be saying today. So I want to cite a discourse from the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah Chukas. And I'm specifically citing chapter and verse to discuss these topics to show that it's not just some of my interpretation, but actual Maimorim that talk about this matter. She said, Likutei Torah Chukas, I'm sure some of you thinking, you learned the Maimorim there time back and forth many times. Where does he talk about addiction? Especially drug addiction, alcohol addiction. He doesn't use those words. He talks there about, and this is the language he uses there, of the koyach hamesave and a taiva. So, in the questions that some of the people asked, was the question of, I am addicted to pornography. I stay up at night, my wife goes to sleep and children, and I do not know what to do. I hate myself for it, but I cannot stop. Okay. Another person writes about an addiction to alcohol. Just makes them feel good, they numb themselves. And again, the same thing, I don't want to do that. Well, does Chassidus have anything to say about this? Now here, of course, I qualify again, the key point to understand is that this is not, I am not here to give you a full solution. I'm here to point out how Chassidus talks about it. And coupled with a personal application that you talk to a mashpia and talk to a therapist or whoever else that can help you, a professional, hopefully we can solve the issue. But I don't think I could say something here that's just going to solve it like that overnight. But I will say some critical points, I believe. And here's what he says in Likutei Torah. He talks about the fact there's a desire that a person has, we'll call it the object of desire, and there is the power of desire. Now most people would say, hey, you know something, you're addicted to something, especially if it's destructive, it's evil, and you got to get it out of your system. Whatever it takes. And there are all kinds of, there are intrusive therapies, there are mild therapies, there are kinds of different tricks of the trade. What is the Alter Rebbe, a holy man, saying Chassidus about this? You would think he would say, desire for godliness is beautiful. Desire for this world is klippas v'sitra achre. You have to knock it out, like he says in Tanya, you have to knock it out in every possible way. Here he comes in this Likutei Torah Chukas. He talks about the Parah Aduma. He says, what do you do to purify from the impurity of death? And here he means death in every possible way, also emotional death. What do you have to do? You have to burn the parah till it's ash. You have afer left, the dust. You mix that with mayim chayim, with live water, meaning water from a live brook. Okay. So he explains, what is this ash? What is the ash? So he says, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for two things. When a person desires something, let's say they desire something terrible, something sexual that's inappropriate. He doesn't use that example. I'm using that example. So you'd think, okay, that's terrible. But no, but there's something else. There's the power of desire. Where does desire come from? Why does the soul desire something altogether? It comes from a passionate force of energy within you that now has been trapped and focused by a certain object. That object is destructive. The desire is a powerful force. It's neutral. It could have been directed to something else entirely. So he distinguishes that what you have to do is burn the parah, the fat and the blood of the animal, and get rid of the object of desire and redirect the power of desire. Now this is a fundamental and very powerful force in life. Well, let's spell it out specifically. I was once speaking to a group of teens at risk. They got in trouble with drugs and alcohol and other things like that. And I asked them, they were already in rehab, so they were already on the rebound, thank God. And I asked them, what is the root of your issue? Nobody wants to fall into a trap of addiction. No, which human being, which dignified human being wants to be addicted to something, be dependent on something? How did you begin? So this one said I had bad friends. This one said my family was going through a bad divorce, my parents, and all these things contributed. But we tried to identify the root. And I was making a point, and the root is, interestingly, was for most, boredom. Boredom. When you're empty, you have nothing going on. So boredom sounds very innocent, but boredom is a breeding ground. It's a void. That's where it begins. You're bored, you have no way to fill up your life, you feel dead, you feel not passionate, not committed. So what you do is you start feeding it. What do you feed it with? Whatever is handy, whatever is easy. Right there you have it. The desire for action, the desire for a high, the desire for passion is a very healthy thing. Only dead people don't have passion. A human being has to have passion. The problem is the object of the desire. So the challenge is, how do you rip away? You don't tell a person, don't desire things. You have to find an alternative. Whatever it is that turns you on in something in an unhealthy way, you have to find a way that turns you on in a healthy way. Now you'll say, it's easier said than done. Of course it's easier said than done. But it's a method. It's not a method that's miraculous. Miraculous would be, you have desire and suddenly we cut out all your desires. That's almost impossible. Unless you literally just blindfold yourself and tie your arms and legs and handcuff yourself, you're never going to move. We're talking about within our humane structure and possibilities, it's redirecting. You take people who are passionate, especially creative, give them a creative project that has positive value, and you are somewhat weakening the energy that's being invested in the negative stuff. Can this be done overnight? Probably not. But it can be done in stages. So we have an approach based on a principle in Chassidus. Someone will say, does this principle exist in other schools of psychology? Perhaps. That's not a contradiction. There are many truths that exist everywhere. But you can take this and develop this into a tremendous tool, no doubt in my mind. We're in the infancy of developing it that way. Let's move to another question. What does a healthy person think, feel, act like? Well, that's a vital question. And to rephrase it in a different question, how does Chassidus practically help people with mental health issues like depression, anxiety, past trauma, substance abuse, addictive behavior? That's a mouthful. I don't believe I could answer all of that. But I believe I answered some of it earlier, but I will say the following. A healthy human being from a Chassidic point of view is basically a healthy soul in a healthy body. Health can be defined as seamlessness. Let's use physical example. When the blood is flowing through your through your veins, and your nerves are healthy, what's happening is there's a flow. Like he says in the Geras HaKodesh. If there's an impediment, God forbid, a growth, a wound, an injury, the blood can't flow. The blood can't flow, there's a block. The blood can't flow, it can cause all kinds of problems. Psychologically and emotionally it's the same. There's a flow. Look at newborn children, healthy newborn children, the flow is there. They're running about, they're exploring, they're not inhibited, they have no fear. When they learn from parents to be fearful, that's when you start having the beginnings of psychological aberrations. You start questioning yourself. Maybe I'm not allowed, inhibited. If you're criticized by adults, by your parents, again and again, you start questioning your own judgment, and your self-esteem begins to go down. So basically, health, just define soul, how your soul flows through you. And what do I mean by soul? Soul simply means your connection to your purpose of why you were created. That idea that people were mentioned earlier, that dedicated to the cause can hurt you, what is meant to say is not dedicated to the cause and overlooking who you are. No, you were created who you are because you have something to contribute and a calling that you have. Every business needs a mission statement. So do you. That is a healthy person. Identifying your mission in life, or the details of it, and living your life accordingly. As soon as there's a disconnect between who you are and what you do, you have the beginnings of lack of health. That's one way I would interpret it briefly. So, love. Love, for example, is an aspect of, is a human emotion. You can have healthy love, you can have unhealthy love. Healthy love flows. It's a flow, like a heartbeat. Contract, expand. Rotzei shuv, Chassidus, rotzei shuv. What is it in a relationship? Is give and take. If in a relationship one person is giving and the other one's taking exclusively, you have an unhealthy relationship, even if they're both happy. A loving relationship is a give and take. It's two circles that join together like this, not annihilating one another. So love is exactly that. A question was asked, what is the meaning of Ava and Yiras Hashem? Which is another term we use, and most of us think it's beyond us. In chapter 16 of Kuntus Eitz HaChaim, the Rebbe Rashab says, don't think it's beyond you. I mean every person is capable. I'll give you a small example of what Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem is. Ava is a feeling of closeness. Yira does not mean fear. Yira means awe, a feeling of respect. Every husband and wife has to have an Ava-Yira relationship. What does that mean? Ava means a sense of intimacy, closeness, or else there's no relationship. And Yira means there's a sense of boundaries. There's a mystique. Each person has a mystique. You respect that mystique. Apply that now in human relationships to our relationship with God is the same thing. A close relationship with God is that I matter, I'm valuable. And a Yira relationship with God is saying God is beyond me. It's not all about me. Both are necessary. Im einan nili mili, aminila atzmi. That's Ava and Yira in the simplest terms. Now many of us say, what do you say? I learned Ava means Ava b'lcholavavcha v'chanavshecha, Ava kirish priyesh, Ava b'tainugim. It's a nice words. It comes down to a relationship. Ava is a closeness. My chesed connects to God's chesed. Yira is an element of distance. Now, because we're running out of time, I'm sticking to the 8 to 9 period. I have to say, a lot of the questions I wanted to address, I have not even touched the surface. But, B'li Neder, my pledge here is to continue this session. You please continue writing into us. We're going to create a form now, so it'll be completely anonymous. So it's not just by email or form where you can write anything you like. Everything will be kept confidential. It's at MyLife at meaningfullife.com is right now the address that we set up. And please, do not hesitate. I think together we can create a revolution. We were given the greatest gift of all. Torah, Chassidus, is the precious stone in the crown of the king. And given to us in order to help us preempt issues and to heal from issues. And as I said, B'li Neder, Mitzvah Hashem, please God, we will try to apply it best as possible. Your feedback is always welcome, your critique, your comments, you name it. Your individuality is necessary here. Express yourself. And together, hopefully, we can make the Rebbe proud, the Rabbeim proud, and show that the effort that they put in and invested and sacrificed, we know the Mesiras Nefesh they had for Chassidus, that we are appreciating and living up to it, at least attempting to do so. I think Yud Aleph Shvat is a great time to make that achlata, and I'm very proud to be part of the team that is launching this effort. And I hope this is a catalyst for all of us to challenge ourselves and say, Imreiku, if it's missing, it's inside of us. Let us look at Chassidus, apply it, challenge ourselves, put our heads together, and come up with the best psychological model, spiritual model, emotional model, cognitive model, to become the healthiest possible people, where our spirits, our souls, flow through our bodies, where there's an emotional connection, instead of dissonance, where we don't live a life of duplicity and duality and having voices going in this direction and that direction. And hopefully we will continue, and I will address every question that comes this way. That's my pledge. And so don't hesitate. If your question was not answered, we will answer it next week or in the coming weeks. Thank you very much. It's been an honor to share these few words.